The history of the United States is replete with examples of oppression of various minority groups. Being LGBTQ+ has traditionally been enough of a reason for being victimized by discrimination and intimidation. As a result, homophobia and homohatred are the most common environmental problems for the client when viewed from a person and environment perspective. The social worker's personal, religiosity and political conservatism, socialization and acceptance of the social and cultural norms, and professional values, education, socialization, and work experience, will influence the delivery of their services to the client population. What happens when there is an incongruence between the cultural norms of the professional values and the social and personal values held by the worker? Such incongruence may lead to values conflict and a dilemma for the professional and, potentially, force the social worker to exclude the LGBTQ+ client from appropriate services. The social worker may find themselves forced to resolve any cognitive dissonance which may arise from such competing theoretical frameworks. American social work takes place in a more pluralistic milieu than is accounted for in a Eurocentric, heterocentric worldview. It takes in a multiracial, multi-ethnic, and even non-binary gender society instead of strictly in a white, heterosexual, binary gender context. This multicultural reality is reflected in the National Association's Code of Ethics with its cultural competence and humility requirements. When conservative religious and political values reflect a belief that only one form of sexual and gender expression is correct, the importance of cultural humility is actively denied. The NASW's values include a belief and value in fighting for the social justice of the LGBTQ+ community as a part of the ongoing struggle for full equality and inclusion. It is essential to examine the meaning behind conservative religious and political values rather than simply assert they exist and offer no context for mutual understanding. Conservative political and religious values tend to unite around family values. These values incorporate the idea of relatively concrete, strict moral foundations, such as the concept of non-heterosexuality as sinful and a threat to family values are often associated with evangelical and fundamentalist Christianity. Political and religious conservatism is often intertwined with one another in that people bind themselves into political teams that share moral narratives. There appears to be a close relationship between conservative religion in evangelical and fundamentalist Christianity and political conservatism. The LGBTQ community continues to experience a certain amount of animus from some religious groups, and this animosity can lead to the LGBTQ+ client. 1. Feeling diminished in the value of their relationships. 2. Suffering an adverse effect upon their self-esteem and sense of self. 3. Experience the religious social worker not acknowledging their issues or concerns, or even their lives outside of the relationship, except for in a manner that pathologizes the client simply on account of their sexual orientation or gender identity. While the NASW Code of Ethics from 2017 promotes the values of service, personal autonomy, the dignity of the individual, and respect for the client's relationships, a social worker may experience a sense of conflict when their values, when based on a more traditionalist and conservative framework, reflect a perspective of the LGBTQ+ client's orientation/gender identity as being either sinful or pathological. The tension that the social worker may experience would result from a potential clash between the various contextual dimensions found within the differing multicultural, spiritual, religious, and organizational dynamics and a possible dichotomy in worldviews as expressed by competing philosophies. A social worker's degree of religiosity, when combined with their level of political conservative values and attitudes, works to help shape their negative perception of the LGBTQ+ client. How does the social worker's degree of religiosity moderate the relationship between political attitudes and the social worker's perceptions of LGBTQ+ clients? The presenting problem documented here is the potential for unequal assessment and intervention for LGBTQ+ clients by social workers due to higher degrees of conservatism and how they may influence the social worker's views of their client. Research by So, Brown, and Taylor, 2014, indicates that Christianity remains a driving force for homophobic attitudes in society. In contrast, additional research asserts that conservative political values are traditionally associated with oppressive attitudes and behaviors. How does the social worker's degree of conservative attitudes influence their perception of the LGBTQ+ client? The central concepts in this study are the social worker's degree of religiosity and political conservatism, the independent variable, and their perception of the LGBTQ+ client, dependent variable. There is a relationship between social work, religion, and spirituality. This study focuses on the association between the degree of religiosity/political conservatism and the social worker's resulting perception of their LGBTQ+ client. The following terms will be used throughout this presentation with the associated meanings as discussed within this video. Bi or bisexual refers to a person who may be sexually, emotionally, or affectionately attracted to members of different genders. Cisgender is when a person was assigned a gender at birth, based on their genitalia, and they continue to express that gender identity and expression through the course of their life. Cultural humility refers to the willingness and ability to 1. Not assume the superiority of the social worker's own culture, and 2. Regard the LGBTQ+ client's life experiences and issues through a new perspective. Gay refers to someone, usually a male, who is sexually, emotionally, or affectionately attracted to other members of the same gender. This term is generally used to describe gay men, and females who match this description are referred to as lesbians. Gender is a social construct that defines the human experience by being either male or female. Gender is an expression of how one feels and identifies themselves, how they feel inside. Homohatred is the most active form of discrimination against members of the LGBTQ+ community based on sexual orientation and/or gender identity and comes from firmly held religious beliefs and heterosexist attitudes. Homonegativity is the expression of moderately discriminatory attitudes regarding the LGBTQ+ community that originate from nominally held beliefs that stigmatize and other the LGBTQ+ community based on membership in a sexual minority group and may include any negative attitude or devaluation of the LGBTQ+ person that is expressed due to the individual's sexual orientation/gender identity. Homophobia is the pervasive fear of gay and lesbian people and can often be used when describing the same reaction towards members of the bisexual, transgender, and queer communities. Homosexuality refers to people who are attracted to other members of the same gender. This is an outdated word that carries the connotation of mental illness and pathology. Lesbian refers to a woman who is sexually, emotionally, or affectionately attracted to other members of the same gender. LGBTQ+ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer and/or questioning. Religion is the institutionalized expression or pattern of how a person perceives the divine, God, through the utilization of symbols, behaviors, practices, and beliefs. Religiosity refers to one's religious beliefs, the exclusion of other religious beliefs or philosophies, and the people who espouse these different beliefs and doctrines, one's understanding of their religious beliefs, and their practice of these beliefs. Religiosity may also be viewed as one's obligation as to how to believe and practice and integrate their religious beliefs in their personal and professional lives. Stigma refers to when an individual, or group, experiences being labeled or negatively judged by others because of some characteristic assumed to be held by members of the stigmatized group, some characteristic which makes the person different or other in some manner. Transgender refers to the experience of a person whose internal reality is that of being a member of a gender that is different from the one assigned at birth and which was based on the person's genitalia. According to the United States Census, over 80% of all Americans report some form of religious affiliation and, in a study from 1988, roughly 80% of social work students from one Eastern school responded that it is vital to focus attention on religion in the practice of social work. This is consistent with the finding that approximately 81.9% of all American licensed clinical social workers being at least moderately spiritual and indicates that religion has remained consistent over the decades as an essential factor for social workers. Social work has been noted as the profession that is the largest clinically trained helping profession in America, and that the majority report being affiliated with a Christian denomination, and that Christian-identified social workers are more likely to incorporate spiritually related interventions with clients at an overall higher frequency than other religious traditions. While religiosity may be necessary for practitioners across the religious spectrum, Christianity appears to be most likely utilized within the social worker/client milieu. Hodge, 2002, notes that approximately 25% of all Americans identify as evangelical Christian. This is relevant given the professed belief that many Christians, especially from the Protestant worldview, that LGBTQ+ orientation and identity are consequences of personal choice and responsibility and are symptomatic of accepting some form of falsehood, implying, for example, that non-cisgender identities are a denial of some universal truth. The potential for the social worker integrating a fundamentalist framework into their professional practice may be seen by some as potentially problematic given the perception that some may hold that the true fundamentalists has a complete conviction that they know what is right and true not only for themselves but for the rest of us as well and so cannot focus on the client's agenda, the client's self-determination. This professional population may be likely to find themselves encountering an LGBTQ+ client. LGBTQ people are slightly more than twice as likely to report experiencing mental health issues, such as depression and anxiety disorders. This may indicate an increased probability of a non-heterosexual or non-cisgender person seeking mental health assistance through a clinical social worker. Additionally, LGBTQ individuals are more likely to find themselves struggling financially as a consequence of oppression and discrimination. Eugenios, 2021, further increasing the likelihood of an LGBTQ person seeking some form of services through social services and agencies. The North American Association of Christians in Social Work seeks to serve its members by equipping them with the means to successfully incorporate their religious faith in their daily and professional lives. While they do not offer positions for its members to follow to adhere to religious beliefs, this lack of unified direction may allow some more conservatives to integrate more traditional religious beliefs and practices, religiosity, in their professional venues. Suppose the social worker adheres to the concept of non-heterosexuality and gender nonconforming identity and expression as expressions of sinful choices. In that case, then this belief may also be incorporated into professional practices and policies. The social worker who views non-heterosexual and non-cisgender expression as either sinful or deviant may view an intervention promoting celibacy, passing, or conversion as being in the LGBTQ+'s best interests and as a way of actively preventing harm to the client. The North American Association of Christians in Social Work does not offer position papers for its membership to read and follow in professional ethics vis-a-vis spiritual or religious beliefs. Nevertheless, some Christian universities offer courses in social work that are steeped in a religious worldview and seek to challenge their students and graduates to think of problems from a scriptural perspective. They may seek to promote a specific, evangelical worldview that teaches the professional to view the issues facing the LGBTQ+ within a particular version of a biblical philosophy. While the National Association of Social Workers seeks to promote the values of social justice, some schools are permitted to promote a worldview that may question these values when they appear to contradict a religious perspective. Understanding the social worker's religiosity and integrating their faith into their professional life is essential. One article notes that the LCSW's integration of faith is the top predictor of their ability and willingness to integrate their clients' own religious beliefs and spirituality into the assessment and intervention processes, including predicting the ability to work with and support the client's autonomy and efficacy in self-determination, relationships, and problem-solving. Hoogan and Scales, 2018, noted the potential for a values conflict for the social worker when the values and standards promoted by the NASW conflict. Gaddis reports the desire to promote the religious and biblical worldview as the paramount one to practice for viewing client issues. Landrino, 2021, argues that religious philosophies are the foundation for all forms of oppression. This implies a sacred connection to political conservatism and the potential for the politically conservative social worker, whether religiously conservative or not, to express the need for either the theologically based social stratification as indicated in Altemeyer's right-wing authoritarian personality survey or the stratification as designed to protect the power and privilege of the dominant group as expressed in social dominance theory. Such politically conservative attitudes could imply a more significant limitation on access to needed services and programs for LGBTQ+ clients. The relationship between the social worker and the LGBTQ+ client is the avenue through which the client may learn to empower themselves, develop better decision-making, and develop and utilize relationships to help the client cope. The question explored here was whether there is a link between the social worker's level of religiosity and any negative perceptions of the LGBTQ+. An additional significance to this study is the potential to draw corollary associations between the social worker's perceptions of clients from other traditionally oppressed groups as may be influenced by other external factors, such as class or different political beliefs. As such, it may be reasonable to question that while their religious or political attitudes may not have impacted the social worker's perceptions of an LGBTQ+ client, might their beliefs or perceptions about women or a member of a racial or ethnic minority group be influenced by certain convictions or practices? One practical question to raise is how to define social work. Canfield describes social work as restoring, protecting, maintaining, or creating someone's humanity. That's our baseline for social work and social work research. 2021. Social work has developed due to people's basic desire to address the needs of the disenfranchised. For this study, social work was evaluated in terms of its history and present of restoring the dignity of the LGBTQ+ client in the face of traditional oppression. Protecting the LGBTQ+ client's rights, needs, wants, and autonomy. Maintaining the LGBTQ+ client's dignity and autonomy by respecting the client's non-harmful choices and fictive kin relationships. Creating the LGBTQ client's humanity through active inclusion of the client in the assessment and intervention processes, respecting the LGBTQ client through the social worker's willingness to expand on their cultural awareness, and practicing cultural humility through the acquisition of a new perspective with the LGBTQ client. However, conflict can arise when the social worker interacts with the LGBTQ client from a perspective that focuses on the client's sexual orientation or gender identity as the presenting problem. This issue can result in inappropriate treatment, mainly when this implies that the client's rights to dignity and autonomy are not actively respected and valued by the worker. The client's sexual orientation or gender identity is only an issue when the client or social worker has internalized certain homonegative and heterosexist cultural norms. Research has been conducted into integrating faith for the social worker in their work lives and for the client regardless of sexual orientation/gender identity. What appears to be lacking is how the first one, the social worker's integration of faith in their professional practice, may correlate with a decrease in unconditional acceptance of the LGBTQ client. As LGBTQ people continue to seek social services and mental health care from social workers, it is especially timely in this age of the demand for increased religious freedoms and liberties to examine how religion and politics may influence the social worker. This is a relevant topic given the numbers of Americans who self-identify as non-heterosexual and/or non-binary in terms of their gender identities and the fact that social workers are susceptible to absorbing the explicit and implicit biases held by mainstream society. If Landrino's contention that religious beliefs are the foundation and ultimate source of justification for oppression is correct, it is appropriate to examine the connection between religion and homophobia. Suppose religious beliefs help the social worker understand the fundamental problems of human existence and begin a process to help their clients resolve these problems. In that case, it is essential to understand what role the integration of religious beliefs and practices may play in the professional experience as they relate to discerning the LGBTQ clients presenting problems from the initial engagement phase of the relationship through evaluation of the process. Studies indicate a strong connection between religious fundamentalism and homophobic attitudes and beliefs, and that there are similar connections between religious fundamentalism and racism and sexism. A growing body of literature supports the contention that political influences among people are essential to understand. McDaniel, 2016, and Tao, 2021, point out the importance of political philosophy as a tool for helping to shape the social worker's perception of the world, how to behave in that world, and the connection with political values and group identity. Political and religious philosophies may intersect in terms of self-identifying group membership and relating to other members and those who are a part of the various outgroups. Understanding the religious/political connections with homophobia may also provide timely insight into the religious/political link and other forms of prejudice and causes for oppression. The review of the current literature suggests the likelihood of potential values conflicts for these social workers and the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics. Still, the literature does not explain how this conflict may impact the worker's perceptions of the LGBTQ client. Even though social work is a profession that prides itself on certain of its more progressive values, such as advocating for clients' human rights and respect for their dignity and relationships, the review of the literature for this study indicated that there is the potential for internal conflict for social workers who hold a more conservative value system. LGBTQ individuals are noted for using various services offered through social services agencies at either the same rate as their heterosexual peers or perhaps at an increased rate as a natural consequence of oppression, minority stress, stigma, and discrimination. At the same time, social workers are more likely than any other helping professional to harbor homophobic attitudes and beliefs. In addition, the American legal system is seeing an influx in demand for religious freedom laws to permit discrimination against LGBTQ people based on religious belief. The topic is timely as these seemingly opposing worldviews, the values espoused by the National Association of Social Workers, and the demand for religious freedom with its implications of protecting freedoms for religious people and allowing a form of meritocracy that denies the impact of racism, sexism, and homophobia as a tool for restricting access for a class of people, are currently in a conflict that is played out in the court system and on television regularly. It is a reality in the here and now. It can have severe consequences for the LGBTQ client who may lose access to services entirely should a provider opt to discriminate in the name of sincerely held beliefs while being the only resource nearby. The review of the current literature suggests the likelihood of potential values conflicts for these social workers and the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics. Still, the literature does not explain how this conflict may impact the worker's perceptions of the LGBTQ client. Even though social work is a profession that prides itself on certain of its more progressive values, such as advocating for clients' human rights and respect for their dignity and relationships, the review of the literature for this study indicated that there is the potential for internal conflict for social workers who hold a more conservative value system. LGBTQ+ individuals are noted for using various services offered through social services agencies at either the same rate as their heterosexual peers or perhaps at an increased rate as a natural consequence of oppression, minority stress, stigma, and discrimination. At the same time, social workers are more likely than any other helping professional to harbor homophobic attitudes and beliefs. In addition, the American legal system is seeing an influx in demand for religious freedom laws to permit discrimination against LGBTQ+ people based on religious belief. The topic is timely as these seemingly opposing worldviews, the values espoused by the National Association of Social Workers, and the demand for religious freedom with its implications of protecting freedoms for religious people and allowing a form of meritocracy that denies the impact of racism, sexism, and homophobia as a tool for restricting access for a class of people, are currently in a conflict that is played out in the court system and on television regularly. It is a reality in the here and now. It can have severe consequences for the LGBTQ+ client who may lose access to services entirely should a provider opt to discriminate in the name of sincerely held beliefs while being the only resource nearby. While there has been much research on the integration of religion and spirituality in social work practice, there has been little research on the impact of religiosity and political attitude on the social worker as independent variables and how they are associated with their perceptions of the LGBTQ+ client. This research sought to build upon the earlier literature and demonstrate some connections between the two major variables. The discussion portion will indicate some suggested steps to help bring a more equitable resolution to this gap in understanding. To better grasp what the foundations of this conflict include, some of the history of social work, connections between biblical values and the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics, and specific sociological theories will be examined through the lens of developing a better understanding of this problem. There has to be a relationship between the social worker and any client. Within the relationship, services for the client can be offered, considered by the client, rendered, and accepted. The purpose of this study was to examine the role of the social worker's religiosity, their conservative political values, and how they shape the workers' perceptions of their LGBTQ+ clients. To understand the nature of the social worker/LGBTQ+ client relationship, there is the need to examine the power sharing between the social worker, authority, and the LGBTQ+ client, the nature of pathologizing the LGBTQ+ client based on sexual orientation and/or gender identity, and how negative perceptions of the client may shape the social worker/client relationship. There must be a relationship between the client and the social worker to successfully deliver services and interventions on the LGBTQ+ client's behalf. Social work in 21st century America has committed itself to advocate for social justice, promoting the dignity and inherent worth of the LGBTQ+ client, and respecting the relationships of this population. This proactive drive of the profession for inclusion has not been the complete story about the history of American social work. The profession's history has ranged from a tool for social control and enforcing the social and cultural norms of the dominant group, to holding with psychological theories that pathologize the LGBTQ+ client, to a more progressive stance that still allows for professionals to be exempted from the reasonable practice of these values through the use of Title IX exemptions for religious schools with social work programs and values-based referrals. The social work profession has not had an affirming view of the LGBTQ+ community and its issues for much of its history. A current literature search shows an absence of research into this aspect of the field's history. It appears to reflect the erasure of past LGBTQ+ issues and needs from past narratives, rendering this aspect of history invisible and marginalizing this form of the structural oppression of the community by the profession. American history also reports that the profession was a mechanism for social control in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Social workers emphasized moral concerns among clients, sometimes over practical and institutional considerations, as early social work used Christian language to help inform its very framework. For the social worker concerned with promoting social and systemic change, this could create a potential conflict between religious stewardship, scientific professionalism, and political idealism. The contradictory tensions are inescapable. Initially, the profession may be seen as a mechanism for social control and a tool for oppression. The concept of caring for the poor and the oppressed was a form of social control that was designed for use as an instrument of moral judgment. This was conducted employing determining who was deserving and who was unworthy of receiving any form of outside assistance. At the same time, people were spiritually commanded to care for the poor, There was an inherent conflict between religious laws and Calvinistic belief in hard work and sin of idleness. The understanding of causes of poverty, for example, is related to the belief that poverty was the natural consequence of the character flaws of people needing help. Early social welfare attempts reflected this philosophical framework. Charitable organizations and friendly visitors rested upon a series of preconceived moral judgments and tended to view morality as the cause of living well and immorality, character defects, as causes of poverty and oppression. Clients had earned their life circumstances, negating any general belief in societal failures and oppression. Thus, social work may also be seen as a means for protecting and perpetuating the status, and oppression as a controlling process as the natural rewards of Christian character and moral living. This implies the potential for conflict between the social work goals and values of empowerment and social justice with the philosophy and practice of the profession as containment, with social work serving as the handmaiden of the status quo. In the first half of the 20th century, the profession saw a move from working to resolve the client's moral failure to coping with personal deficits. Specific application of theoretical knowledge to address human issues allowed the profession to become receptive to Freud, the reliance on mental hygiene, and the division between healthy heteronormativity and pathological non-heterosexuality and non-cisgender identities. Traditionally, modern social work relies on various psychological models to promote cultural competence. This understanding of cultural competence did not necessarily regard diversity as a goal to accomplish. It tended to follow the need for maintaining a Eurocentric, Christian, cisgender male, heterosexual worldview. This left the profession receptive to the psychodynamic theories of Sigmund Freud and others. These theories tended to pathologize the LGBTQ+ experience as a failure to fully achieve the desired developmental identity goals of gender roles and heterosexuality. One natural consequence for the social work profession was the view that homosexuality, as the improper fulfillment as the desired outcome of a heterosexual object choice, was a perversion and a form of arrested development or psychic immaturity, as the LGBTQ+ orientation/gender identity goes against Freud's concept of psychic maturity. Non-heterosexuality and non-cisgender expressions were regarded as psychopathologies. The social worker's religiosity level may influence their professional practice, as religious and spiritual faith can be a core component of the social worker. Conflict theory posits that macrosocial behavior, through policies and theology, influences the behaviors of the individual actor. The social structure provides the framework and the established narratives and patterns that dictate how we act, interact, and behave. As such, somebody cannot simply ignore the social worker's religious belief. Simultaneously, the humanistic approach espoused by the social work indicates a philosophy that every person, including the LGBTQ+ client, has the right to have access to safe and beneficial human services that meet their unique needs. The result is an internal conflict for some social workers between their religious beliefs, if they tend to be more homophobic, and the values and ethics promoted by social work. The relationship between the social worker's personal views and perceptions of the LGBTQ+ client is recursive. Tradition informs the conservative social worker that non-heterosexuality and non-cisgender expression is sinful and deviant. The social worker puts these values into practice and then informs the next generation of social workers that these are truths, thus perpetuating this practice. The next generation of social workers then builds upon this tradition by adding to its continuity and further affirming its authority as things have always been done. This affirmation of righteousness is then further maintained in organizational and personal policies and continues to direct new social workers to practice their craft, passing it down to other workers. Social workers with a higher degree of conservative values perpetuate these values by passing them down as timeless and scientific truths. Social workers who operate from a more faith-based and politically conservative framework recreate the oppressive structures in their professional encounters with their clients and agencies. They influence the systems in which they operate, and these same structures help shape the beliefs and practices of the social worker. Social work celebrates diversity, including religious diversity, and social workers are expected to follow the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics to end all forms of social injustice and oppression. Some social workers may find a conflict between their religious beliefs concerning LGBTQ+ people and the Code of Ethics mandate to promote the dignity of all people, be culturally competent and sensitive, and fight against all forms of oppression. They may experience the sense of choosing which value system to follow, their religious values or the profession's values, as though there can be no reconciliation or integration of the two. Many social workers came into the practice because their religious beliefs and the social work values, ethics, and purposes line up with their religious faith. For some religious social workers, social work may be unethical and social workers may be thought to be more progressive than the general population. Many social workers can relate the code of ethics values with their religious values. Hugan, 2012, argues that a person's calling is related to one's station in life, where one fits into a prescribed hierarchy. One implication is that the social worker's sense of being called to work with oppressed people is a method for integrating one's religious beliefs into the personal and professional spheres. Suppose someone is called to be a social worker. In that case, they must fulfill their responsibilities as a member of a particular social group in the hierarchy in such a way to reflect their religious values and ethics. For Hugan, there is no separation between the divine and the secular. The profession becomes a tool for living out their faith in the mundane world. Religious values and social work values will, in a perfect world, overlap to the benefit of the LGBTQ+ client. In this social worker/LGBTQ+ client milieu, the client's life experiences and values are honored and respected by the worker. The worker can engage with the client in a manner that reflects positive regard and unconditional acceptance. They would engage with the client where they are coming from and not just where the social worker believes they should be. The client is valued when these values overlap and are put into actual practice. Conservative values and attitudes, as demonstrated through conservative religiosity and political conservatism, can intersect, and both have been negatively correlated with affirmative practice. As detailed in the following pages, these values can inform the social worker as to what practices should be, or may be, provided to the client based on their sexual orientation/gender identity. These values may have a genuine impact on the client as a consequence of the worker's biases. Conflict theory. People or groups that hold religious and politically conservative views help determine the social services provided to or denied to the LGBTQ community. In this sense, social services and mental health services are types of resources. By their position of authority, the social worker is the one with the control over these scarce resources needed by the LGBTQ+ client. The worker is the individual who holds power to have access to these resources and services. They or their agencies are responsible for the policies that govern the services provided to the clients. They implement policies that may deny the LGBTQ+ client access to these resources and services because the client has gone against traditional or religious norms and beliefs. The LGBTQ+ client, by having violated conventional and religious beliefs, norms, and values, is placed in the unjust position of forcing the social work or organization to make and enforce policies that oppress the client. They are made out to be the ones responsible for their oppression. This ideology, in turn, creates a recursive pattern in that the social worker with a higher degree of religiosity and political conservatism may then influence other social workers to feel justified and empowered to repeat this pattern, perpetuating this homophobic oppression. The worker or the agency may even develop criteria, such as celibacy, passing, or conversion, that the client cannot realistically meet healthily, thus denying the client of some of the social services or placing them at risk for various adverse mental health issues, such as cognitive dissonance, decreased self-esteem, depression, anger, and potential self-harming behaviors. Social dominance theory. The social worker can decide to help the clients for who they are and not because of their sexual orientation. They can help all the clients regardless of whether or not they belong to the LGBTQ community. This act of positive regard and unconditional acceptance demonstrate to the greater community the importance of knowing people for who they are and the worth and dignity of the LGBTQ+ individual. This, too, can create a recursive pattern by role modeling for other social workers a more positive and empowering model of care for the LGBTQ+ person. The social worker can help LGBTQ clients become free from their problems and fears and better cope with hostile or apathetic treatment they receive in the outside world. The worker can help the client deal with their issues, thus potentially alleviating distress and mental illness symptoms. The culturally competent social worker can help the LGBTQ+ client make a difference in their lives and those of others like them, thus creating a place in society. Social constructivism theory. Political conservatism is a belief that supports and accentuates particular traditions and depends on the person to maintain the society. A politically conservative social worker is likely to have certain ethics and values regarding people's sexual orientation and create a form of social control and regulation that can affect and impact the lives of the LGBTQ+ client and community. These traditional perspectives may treat the LGBTQ+ community and its members differently and cause the client to feel like they are not wanted and do not meet the appropriate gender roles for either of the two traditionally recognized genders. Social workers or an agency with such a belief may deny the client the appropriate services and resources they require. They create their agency and instill values that do not support the LGBTQ community or gender. The LGBTQ+ client may not have access to the services and resources they need to empower them to live better lives. They do not have access to those services they need, such as healthcare services that would help reduce the adverse impact of mental illness or the appropriate services to become more financially secure and independent. The social worker with these conservative and traditional values, wittingly or unwittingly, adds to the LGBTQ+ client's problems.